I signed away everything I owned without even reading it. If you love true stories of betrayal, revenge, and poetic justice, subscribe now. It's completely free and helps us bring more stories like this to life. My name is Elara Quinn, and 5 weeks before my wedding, I found out that the man I loved had forged a future where I would lose everything. It started with a misplaced folder on Damon's desk. We had just returned from a venue visit when I noticed it, thick, leather-bound, and embossed with the gold stamp of his legal team. Something about it felt off. Damon was usually meticulous with his documents. That folder was always locked away. But he had stepped into the shower, humming like nothing in the world could touch him, and I, God help me, opened it. The papers inside weren't just premarital agreements. They were revised premarital agreements. The original contract I'd signed months ago had been replaced with this version, quietly slipped into our lawyer's file, with a new clause buried on page 11. In the event of divorce, all shared and prior acquired assets would transfer to the husband. No questions. No fight. Just, gone. My vision blurred. My hand clutched the folder so tightly that my nails dented the cover. This wasn't standard legal oversight. This was a setup. Damon knew I owned majority shares in an architectural firm. He knew about the 2 condos I bought before I met him. He knew about the inheritance I had kept so private even my friends barely understood its size. He knew. And he still tried to take it all. The bathroom door opened with a gust of steam and Damon's voice floating out. "You want wine or tea, babe?" I couldn't answer. I tucked the folder back and smiled when he walked out in a towel, feigning exhaustion from the day. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, playing back every "I love you," every breakfast he brought me in bed, every moment he looked me in the eyes and swore I was safe with him. And all I could see now was a mask slipping. A predator in a suit, waiting for vows to become leverage. I could have walked away right then. Called off the wedding. Confronted him. But something in me twisted, hardened. No, I wouldn't run. Not yet. I needed proof first. And then, I'd make sure he felt what it was like to be outmaneuvered by someone who refused to be his pawn. The next morning, I played my part. Smiled through brunch. Agreed to cake tastings. Meanwhile, I reached out to my firm's legal consultant in secret. She had worked with my father for decades and trusted no one blindly. When she saw the contract, her lips tightened. "Did you sign this?" "No," I whispered. The original didn't have clause 11. Her brows furrowed. "This was swapped after signatures. You'd have no case unless you found the original version." I felt cold. It was digital. And Damon deleted our shared cloud drive 3 months ago. But then, her eyes lit up. "Wait. Who notarized the original?" My breath hitched. "Clara. My assistant. If she kept a scan, and she's as obsessive as I remember, there's hope." Clara did keep it. On a USB, shoved into a backup drawer. I could have cried. When she handed it over, I finally had both contracts in hand, the original and Damon's altered copy. And I wasn't the only one Damon had tried this on. Because when I scoured deeper into the notarization records, I found another name connected to Damon Vale. Seraphine Vale. I stared at the line again. His wife. No. That couldn't be right. Damon had told me he'd never been married. That commitment terrified him until me. That I was the only woman he ever saw a future with. But the records didn't lie. Damon Vale had married Seraphine Hale 5 years ago. And the file? Still listed as legally unresolved. Not divorced. Not annulled. No court filings to dissolve it. No separation of assets. No mention of her ever being removed from his life. My stomach churned. I felt like I was staring into a black hole, everything I thought I knew about the man I was supposed to marry twisting into something monstrous. Who was Seraphine? Where had she gone? Why had he buried her existence? I found the answer in a clipped business article from 7 years ago. Seraphine Halevale appointed director of Haletech. She was young, brilliant, poised to take her family's company global. And then, gone. No further mentions. No resignation statement. No scandal. Just a digital vanishing act. Until now. Until me. Because Damon hadn't just tried to steal from me. He had done it before. And if Seraphine was still legally his wife, then I wasn't the one bound by a contract. She was. Which meant, everything Damon was trying to take from me, he had no legal right to. Not while Seraphine was still his lawful spouse. I looked at the phone in my hand, fingers trembling slightly as I typed in her name and found a business profile, outdated, but still tied to a contact email. I hesitated, then sent the message. Asterisk subject, we need to talk. About Damon Vale, asterisk. My heart pounded as the message sent. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. And then, finally, a reply. Where can we meet? And just like that, Damon's game stopped being his. It was ours now. And I had just found my most powerful ally. Next, the woman he tried to erase. The coffee shop was quiet, tucked between an old bookstore and a florist whose scent drifted through the air like an apology. I arrived early. Too early. Every passing second made me question my decision. What if she didn't show? What if it was a trap? What if Damon knew I'd reached out and was already 2 steps ahead? But then the door opened. And Seraphine Halevale stepped in like she still owned every room she walked into. She was striking. Not just beautiful, but composed, lethal in silence. Her dark copper hair was tied back into a clean twist. Her coat was sharp, pressed to perfection. Her expression unreadable. She scanned the room and landed on me. Didn't hesitate. Walked over and sat down without a word. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said, unsure whether to smile or run. You mentioned Damon, she said, her voice low and clear. That alone was worth my time. I slid the altered contract across the table. She didn't reach for it right away. Just looked at it. Then at me. You're marrying him. I nodded, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. That was the plan. She picked up the paper, her fingers tracing the edges like it was familiar. Let me guess. Clause 11. I blinked. She smirked, just barely. He used the same trick on me. Slightly different wording. Same theft. I leaned forward. Then, why didn't you expose him? Why did you disappear? Her eyes flicked up. For the first time, I saw something crack through her polished armor. Pain. I tried, she whispered. I fought harder than you can imagine. But Damon doesn't fight fair. He doesn't play by rules. I lost my company, my reputation. My family thought I was reckless, falling for him so quickly. When I finally left, I had nothing. Why didn't you finalize the divorce? She exhaled. I tried. He never signed. Said it was the bad time. Then he vanished. Changed numbers. I couldn't afford the legal chase. I assumed he'd never risk marrying again. I slid my phone across the table and showed her the wedding website. The smiling photos. The countdown clock. The guests. The venue. Seraphine went still. He planned to make the marriage legal, I said, voice barely above a whisper. And steal everything I built. Just like you. The silence between us stretched. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then, finally, she laughed. A bitter, quiet sound. I knew he'd try to play the game again, she said. But I never thought he'd be dumb enough to leave a legal back door open. I studied her. Are you willing to help me stop him? Her gaze cut to mine like a blade. Oh, darling. I'm not here to help. I'm here to end it. We spent hours piecing the past together. His lies. The patterns. How he charmed investors, wooed women, built empires on foundations of fraud. He knew how to dismantle a life without leaving fingerprints. But Damon had grown arrogant. Lazy. And he'd forgotten about the one woman who had never signed his freedom away. Seraphine Halevale. Legally, still his wife. Here's what we're going to do, I said, spreading out the timeline and the documents on the table. She watched me with cautious respect. You've thought this through. He thinks I'm naive, I said. He thinks I won't look past the flowers and ring fittings. Her smile widened. Then let's give him a ceremony to remember. The next few days were chaos wrapped in satin and secrecy. I continued with wedding preparations. Cake tastings. Rehearsal dinners. All while documenting everything. Seraphine, meanwhile, contacted her old attorney, a woman who owed her a favor too big to ignore. Together, they retrieved proof of Damon's unresolved marital status. Tax records. Emails. Everything he thought he'd buried. We filed to freeze his ability to merge assets with a new spouse. The filing was timed for the day before the wedding. He wouldn't see it until it was too late. But our revenge wouldn't stop at legalities. We wanted the moment. We wanted his world to break in front of everyone he tried to impress. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. He would stand at the altar. I wouldn't be the one walking toward him. Seraphine would. In my dress. In front of every investor, every family member, every executive he'd ever conned. And he would be forced to face the woman he tried to erase. The night before the wedding, I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked like a bride. Soft. Radiant. Doomed. But inside, I felt steel. Damon thought he was marrying a trophy. What he didn't know was that the ceremony would be his downfall. He wasn't ready for Seraphine. And he sure as hell wasn't ready for me. Next, the ceremony that shattered his empire. The morning of the wedding arrived bathed in golden sunlight, the kind that made everything feel hopeful, even if it was a lie. My hotel suite was filled with the soft rustle of silk, the low murmur of makeup artists, and the scent of gardenias. Everyone around me buzzed with excitement. To them, I was a bride about to marry the perfect man. I let them believe it. Seraphine was in the adjoining room. Calm. Composed. Dressed in an identical version of my gown, tailored to fit her perfectly. I'd made sure of that. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, two women wearing the same dress, bound to the same man, in vastly different ways. When our eyes met, there was no need for words. The plan was clear. The stage was set. My job was to disappear. Hers was to appear. At exactly 11:43 a.m., the wedding planner knocked on my door, beaming. Time to line up, Miss Quinn. Thank you, I said, smoothing the satin folds of my robe. But I need a moment alone first. She nodded, mistaking my request for nerves, and left with a flutter of clipboard pages. I turned to Seraphine. You ready? She adjusted her veil with precision. I've been ready for 5 years. I handed her the ring box. He'll try to touch your hand. Don't flinch. She smirked. He's not worth a blink. By noon, the ceremony hall was packed. The venue was grand, an old cathedral repurposed for luxury weddings, draped in white orchids and crystal chandeliers. Guests filled every pew, their whispers echoing under the vaulted ceilings. Damon stood at the altar, grinning like a man who thought he'd won the lottery. He wore his arrogance like a crown. Perfect suit. Perfect posture. Eyes scanning the crowd as if mentally counting the dollar signs his new bride would bring. He had no idea that his bride was already inside the building, and she wasn't me. Backstage, I watched from a discreet security feed, tucked into the bridal suite. My breath steady. My phone buzzing with the final alert, * court documents delivered to Damon Vale's office. Status, received, *. Seraphine waited just outside the main doors. 2 ushers stood beside her, clueless to the real drama they were about to escort. The music swelled. Everyone rose. And Seraphine began her walk. She moved like smoke, elegant, untouchable. Every step down that aisle felt like a drumbeat of justice. The veil covered her face, but not her presence. Not her power. Damon smiled when he saw her. He reached for her hand with the same smooth confidence he had always wielded. She gave it to him. Only for now. The officiant began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. My stomach coiled tighter with every word. The guests watched, enthralled by the fairy tale unfolding before them. And yet, it was no fairy tale. It was a reckoning. When the officiant turned to Damon, asking the question that had ruined so many lives before. Do you, Damon Vale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Damon didn't hesitate. I do. His voice rang out like a smug declaration of victory. Then the officiant turned to Seraphine. Still veiled. Still silent. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? A pause. Every guest leaned in. Then, clearly and confidently, Seraphine said. I do. The room sighed in collective admiration. The moment had come. You may now lift the veil and kiss your bride. Damon reached forward, smiling, completely unaware that he was about to peel back more than just lace. His fingers lifted the delicate fabric. And froze. The smile died. The color drained from his face. The silence that followed was so sharp it could cut. Seraphine stared back at him, her expression serene. Hello, Damon, she whispered. He stumbled back. The officiant looked confused. The guests erupted in murmurs. I watched from the screen as Damon's world cracked open. What the hell is this? He hissed. Seraphine lifted her bouquet and handed him an envelope. Consider this your second wedding. Or rather, your final one. He opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, the official court notification that his assets were frozen. A copy of the unresolved marriage certificate. And a public statement prepared by Seraphine's legal team, scheduled for press release in exactly 5 minutes. You're insane, he spat, his voice cracking. No, Seraphine said coolly. I'm your wife. The one you never divorced. The camera zoomed in on his expression, confusion giving way to panic, then fury, then something he had never shown before. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. Seraphine stepped back. Enjoy the fallout. And just before she turned away, she added, loud enough for every guest to hear. You didn't marry Elara today, Damon. You tried to commit fraud on a stage full of witnesses. And now, you've lost everything. The crowd gasped. Some stood. Some filmed. Some just stared in shock. And in that moment, Damon Vale realized he wasn't the star of this story anymore. He was the villain in someone else's ending. And it had just been broadcast live. Next, the fallout that followed him home. The video went viral before the last guest left their seat. I watched it happen in real time, from the bridal suite, still in my robe, curled on the velvet couch like a woman who had just pressed a detonator and was now waiting for the dust to settle. By the time Damon fled the altar, trembling and humiliated, someone had already uploaded the full clip. 5 different angles. High definition. Subtitled. #wedding scandal and #Damon Vale started trending before the ceremony was officially called off. He hadn't just lost a bride. He'd lost his legacy. I stayed hidden for the rest of the afternoon. Let Seraphine handle the public part of our revenge. She was brilliant, issuing calm, measured statements to the press. Clarifying her legal status. Outlining Damon's financial missteps. Never angry. Always poised. She played the victim who'd reclaimed her voice, and the world devoured it. Meanwhile, Damon's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His office. His investors. His mother. I watched him walk the corridors outside the cathedral, barking into his phone, his hands flying wildly. The same hands that once cupped my cheek and promised forever. Now those hands were empty. By evening, Seraphine and I reconvened at a quiet apartment above a bookshop she'd been renting under an alias. We sat at the kitchen island, still in our matching dresses, heels kicked off, the air around us thick with adrenaline. "He's going to come after us," I said, sipping wine with steady hands I didn't know I still had. "Let him," Seraphine replied. "We're 5 steps ahead. His entire paper trail is crumbling." She pulled out her laptop and showed me the files, sealed statements from her attorney, time-stamped messages Damon had sent during their marriage, and a digital backup of the altered contract he tried to pass off on me. She had kept everything. "If he fights this," she said, tapping the screen, "he'll bury himself further." That night, I dreamed of a wedding. But instead of Damon at the altar, there was a mirror. And I stood there alone, wearing my gown, finally seeing myself without his shadow behind me. In the days that followed, the fallout intensified. Major news outlets picked up the story. Not just gossip blogs, but real media. Businessman's secret marriage exposed at wedding. Damon Vale, the fiancé with 2 wives and 1 frozen bank account. He tried to issue statements. Blamed a illegal oversight. Claimed Seraphine was extorting him. But no one believed him. His record of shell companies and shadowy investments spoke louder than his rehearsed denial videos. His board members started resigning. His most prominent investor filed suit. One by one, his empire cracked. He tried to contact me. Dozens of messages. Voice notes. Emails. They started gentle. "We need to talk, Elara. This isn't what you think." Then they turned angry. "You had no right. You destroyed everything. I'll make you pay." And finally, they dissolved into desperation. "Please. I lost everything. I don't have anyone." I didn't reply. The man who once held my heart like a fragile thing had revealed the truth. He never wanted me. He wanted what came with me. Power. Status. Ownership. But he forgot, I wasn't a prize. I wasn't a possession. And I certainly wasn't his fool. 1 week after the wedding that wasn't, Seraphine and I met with her attorney and filed a civil suit for damages. Not just for the emotional trauma, but for the calculated financial manipulation Damon had inflicted. We had the evidence. We had each other. And this time, he wouldn't be able to hide behind legal loopholes and corporate shields. The court date was set. The judge was notorious for hating con artists. Seraphine's attorney smiled when she saw his name. "Oh," she said dryly, "he's going to love this one." Meanwhile, Damon was seen exiting a downtown hotel in a wrinkled suit, shouting at a reporter and ducking into a cab like a man running from ghosts. I wasn't done with him. Not yet. Because there was one final thread still dangling. The investors. The very people Damon used to impress with his charm and empty promises. Some of them were mine. And I was ready to tell them exactly who they'd been shaking hands with. Next, the boardroom where he lost his last ally. 3 weeks after the wedding scandal, I walked into the same skyscraper where Damon had once introduced me to his business partners as the future Mrs. Vale and one hell of a creative genius. Now, I was just Elara Quinn again. But I carried something much more dangerous than his last name. The truth. The boardroom was sterile, floor-to-ceiling glass, leather chairs, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. At one end sat the men and women who had poured millions into Damon's ventures. At the other, his latest project lead, nervous, sweating, clearly aware the tide was shifting. I had been invited as a courtesy, one of their consultants for a proposed architectural expansion Damon had promised to spearhead. But the timing wasn't an accident. I knew they wanted to see the woman who had detonated his image. So I didn't hold back. The moment they opened the floor for discussion, I stood, slid a manila folder onto the table, and said calmly, "You deserve to know who you've been investing in." Inside that folder were copies of the court filings, notarized contracts, screenshots of the altered prenup, and a timeline, backed with receipts, of Damon's financial manipulation, from the first fake asset transfer with Seraphine to the attempt to bind me legally without my consent. There were no theatrics. No raised voices. Just hard facts. Undeniable. Mr. Vale, I said, isn't just guilty of moral failure. He's legally compromised, and your association with him may be interpreted as complicit if you continue forward. A long silence followed. Then the man at the head of the table, Raymond Sumner, Damon's oldest investor and mentor, leaned back, his face blank. "Where is he now?" someone finally asked. "Last I heard," I said, "he's dodging subpoenas and sleeping in a rented apartment under someone else's name." Sumner exhaled slowly. Then turned to his assistant. "Schedule an emergency vote," he said. "We remove him from the board. Effective immediately." The assistant nodded, already typing. Someone clapped. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just a slow, steady applause from one of the women who had once vouched for Damon personally. "You've done what no one else could," she said. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because the job wasn't finished. That afternoon, the decision was made official. Damon Vale was ousted. His name scrubbed from every project. His office stripped. His access revoked. Within 48 hours, a public announcement was released by the firm. Due to recent discoveries regarding Mr. Damon Vale's conduct, our firm is terminating all professional and personal associations. We do not tolerate financial deception or the manipulation of legal boundaries for personal gain. I didn't write the statement. But it echoed the exact language I'd used in my private report. Later that week, I received a package. No note. No return address. Inside was a sleek black flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop cautiously, and there she was. Seraphine. She sat on a couch, casual, sipping coffee. "Thought you'd like to know," she said in the video, "I paid a little visit to Damon's new, safe house. He wasn't thrilled to see me. But I brought paperwork. Turns out, he finally agreed to sign the divorce papers. Properly, this time." She held up the signed documents and winked. "Justice is such a beautiful accessory, don't you think?" The screen went black. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty screen, heart pounding. It was over. Truly. Damon Vale no longer had a legal claim to me, to Seraphine, or to anything we built. But even more satisfying than the legal wins or the corporate takedown was the silence. No more voicemails. No more threats. No more man playing puppet master behind the curtain. He was gone. And I was still standing. Stronger. Freer. And finally in control of my own story. Next, the life I chose without him. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet mornings. With sunlight spilling across hardwood floors and coffee brewed for one. With the absence of tension in my shoulders. With the realization that I no longer had to look over mine. After everything, after Damon's betrayal, after the courtroom battles, after watching his empire collapse from the inside, I expected to feel triumphant. But what I felt instead was peace. And peace, I learned, is louder than revenge. I moved back into my own space. A restored loft downtown. No shared toothbrushes. No shared closets. No whispered lies in the morning light. Just me, my plants, my projects, and the view I'd chosen before Damon ever entered my life. The architectural firm I co-founded offered me a sabbatical. They said I deserved it. I took 2 weeks. That was all. Then I came back, not because I needed the distraction, but because creating beautiful spaces was still who I was. Damon didn't get to steal that from me. He stole enough. I restructured the company's contracts to ensure no partner could ever have hidden control again. We created internal workshops on legal transparency, especially for young women just entering the field. What started as a private heartache became a public safeguard. Seraphine and I stayed in touch, less like comrades now, more like 2 women who had survived the same storm. She started her own consulting business, teaching other entrepreneurs how to protect their assets from romantic fraud. She called it Phoenix Advisory. Fitting. We met once for lunch. No press. No headlines. Just 2 women in sunglasses, sharing a bottle of wine and laughing at a man who once thought he could manipulate both of us. You know, she said, raising her glass, the best part isn't that we ruined him. I raised mine in return. It's that we walked away whole. She smiled. Exactly. And it was true. Damon wanted to shatter us. But in the end, we rebuilt. Better. There was one final thread I needed to snip before I could fully close the book. Damon's final message to me, sent weeks after the court rulings, after the media dropped his story for newer scandals. A single line. Asterisk, you won. I hope it was worth it. Asterisk. I didn't reply. Because I knew what he wanted. A response. A tether. Some proof that he still occupied space in my mind. But he didn't. He was just a ghost now. One I'd buried. What had I gained? Not millions. Not headlines. Not applause. I gained the ability to walk through my front door and feel safe. To look in the mirror and see clarity, not confusion. To trust my voice again. And that, for me, was worth everything. One rainy evening, I stood on my balcony watching the streetlights shimmer against the wet pavement. A couple walked by below, arm in arm, laughing like they were the only people in the world. For a moment, I thought of what I almost had. The wedding. The house. The forever I thought I wanted. But I didn't grieve it. Because I understood something now. Some people build love on foundations of truth. Others build it on blueprints of control. Damon never wanted a partner. He wanted a possession. And I I was never meant to be held that way. So instead of chasing the next relationship, I built something else. I bought a small plot of land upstate. Designed the home myself. Minimalist. Warm. Open ceilings. Natural light in every corner. A home that reflected the woman I had become. I moved in by fall. The first night, I lit a fire, made tea, and opened the windows to let the crisp air in. There was no sound but the crackle of wood and the slow breath of wind through the trees. I had nothing to prove. To Damon. To anyone. I was no longer someone's almost wife. No longer a chapter in a cautionary tale. I was Elara Quinn. Architect. Survivor. Author of her own ending. And I had just begun to write the next chapter. Next, when he came back with nothing left to lose. It was early winter when he showed up again. I hadn't heard from Damon in months. After the court verdict and public fallout, he'd gone silent. Social media scrubbed. Business accounts closed. The last I'd heard, he was selling off what remained of his assets to cover legal debts and Seraphine's damages. I thought he'd vanished for good. Until he came to my door. I was on the porch of my new home, wrapped in a wool shawl, sipping coffee, watching frost form delicate veins on the window panes. The kind of morning you cherish in solitude. Then came the knock. Soft. Too soft for a stranger. I opened the door, and there he was. Damon Vale. Thinner. Paler. Hollowed out. He wore the same kind of expensive coat he always did, but it looked like it belonged to someone else now. The collar was frayed. His shoes were scuffed. His eyes, once sharp and predatory, were dull. Elara, he breathed, like my name still gave him ground to stand on. I didn't speak. I just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I didn't know where else to go, he said, his voice raw. That's a first, I replied. He winced. Look, I know what I did. I was wrong. I was. Careful, I interrupted. You're about to say, a different person then. And I'm not in the mood for fiction. His shoulders slumped. I lost everything. No, I said. You gambled everything. And lost. He looked past me into the warm glow of my home, like a child peering through a bakery window. This is nice. It's mine, I replied. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. Something flickered in his voice. Not hope. Not remorse. Need. Desperation. I just want to talk, he said, stepping forward. I didn't move. You forged a contract to steal my life's work, Damon. I made a mistake. You made choices, I snapped. He flinched. I'm not here to beg, he said quietly. I need something to hold on to. Everyone left. Seraphine destroyed me. You destroyed me. I stared at him for a long, cold moment. No, Damon. You destroyed you. He looked like he might argue. Then he didn't. I haven't eaten in 2 days, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I sighed. Walked back inside. And came out with a bag. A sandwich. A water bottle. A winter scarf I never wore. I handed it to him. He took it with shaking hands. Don't come back, I said. He looked at me like he wanted to speak. But the words failed. And for once, he didn't chase control. He simply nodded. And walked away. I watched him disappear into the trees, slow, small, no longer the man who once thought he owned the world. He was just another con man who ran out of marks. I closed the door, locked it, and sat back on the couch as the fire crackled beside me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt done. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it just means letting go of the weight they once had over you. And I had just laid mine down. Next, what I rebuilt from the ashes. In the months that followed Damon's last visit, I never heard from him again. No emails. No messages. No second knock on my door. Just silence. But unlike the haunting silence I once feared, where I'd pace the floor wondering what he was planning behind my back, this silence felt earned. Cleansing. It was the kind that comes after a wildfire, when the land is scorched but the soil is ready for something new. And I had no intention of wasting it. The first thing I did was return to my roots, not professionally, but personally. I visited the town I'd grown up in, the tiny bookstore my mother used to take me to every Friday after school, the park where I used to sketch buildings in a cracked notebook while the other kids played. I stood beneath the same oak tree where I once told myself, someday, I'll build something that lasts. That voice came back to me now, not as a whisper, but as a steady pulse. So I did what I'd always done best. I built. I started a program called Foundation for Her, a mentorship initiative for young women entering architecture, business, or legal professions. Not just internships or seminars. Real education. Real protection. Real tools to defend what they create from predators who hide behind suits and smiles. I made every lesson Damon had taught me, every contract clause, every manipulation, every moment I ignored my instincts, a blueprint for others. I turned the betrayal into a curriculum. The program grew quickly. Word spread. Former clients. Universities. Startups. I was invited to speak at panels, interviewed by women's magazines, and profiled in a business column titled, "The Bride Who Walked Away with the Blueprint." I laughed when I read it. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly right. I never wanted to be known for how I left Damon. But I didn't mind being remembered for what I built after him. There were still moments, of course, when the past flickered. I'd hear a song that played during our engagement party. I'd pass a restaurant where he'd once held my hand across the table, eyes full of calculated warmth. But those moments passed. Because Damon didn't haunt me anymore. He taught me. Not how to love, but how to value myself. How to protect the parts of me I once handed away too easily in the name of romance. I met someone new the following spring. Not a grand entrance. No sweeping gestures. Just a quiet man at a conference who asked smart questions and never interrupted. His name was Theo. A structural engineer with eyes like storm clouds and a laugh that never felt rehearsed. We talked for hours. About materials, wind load, travel, grief, boundaries, and our shared love for ugly ceramic mugs. He didn't ask about Damon. I didn't bring him up. Because my story no longer began with betrayal. It began with me. Standing back up. Putting pen to blueprint again. Not to build a life someone else could profit from. But to build one that finally felt like mine. Next, the one thing I kept from him. There was one secret I never told Damon. One thing he never managed to touch, even with all his scheming, all his forged documents, all his smiles that masked a dagger underneath. My mother's land. Nestled in the foothills outside Rosewood County, it wasn't anything flashy, just a few acres of overgrown meadow, a rundown cottage she used to retreat to when the world felt too loud. She called it the place where noise dies. When she passed, she left it to me. I never mentioned it to Damon. Not once. Because it didn't feel like an asset. It felt like a memory. And somewhere, deep down, I must have known not to show it to him. In the chaos that followed our engagement, the land sat untouched. But after everything was over, after the lawsuits, the public scandal, the failed wedding, I found myself driving there one chilly morning, keys in hand, heart pounding like I was opening a letter from the past. The gate creaked as I pushed it open. Wildflowers had taken over the front steps. The paint peeled from the window frames like old wallpaper. But the bones of the house were still strong. Like me. I spent that spring restoring it. Not professionally. Not like my sleek downtown projects. I did it with my own hands. Scraping. Sanding. Painting. Replacing the broken glass with new panes that let the light in the same way my mother once described, like truth sneaking into a dark room. Each nail I hammered was a punctuation mark in a sentence I never thought I'd get to finish. Each board I replaced was a moment of healing. Damon never knew about this place. And now, it was where I healed. I planted herbs in the backyard. Hung old black and white photos in the hallway. Set up a small drafting table by the window where the sun always fell just right by noon. This wasn't just a retreat. It was a reclaiming. A reminder that I hadn't lost everything. That the core of who I was had remained untouched. Unbroken. There were no cameras here. No reporters. No whispers about the bride who exposed the billionaire. Just birdsong and wind and quiet. So much quiet. One evening, while sipping tea on the front porch, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, it was a man's voice. Slurred. Desperate. Damon. Elara, he said. You still have something of mine. I know you do. The land. Your mom's land. I heard. I saw a photo in that magazine. The porch, that tree. I know that place. I didn't move. I don't want much, he continued. Just a share. You owe me. Click. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. I didn't call back. I didn't reply. I just smiled. Because that land was never his. That piece was never his. That me, the one that stood up and fought back, the one who built something new from the rubble, was never his to begin with. And now, for the first time in years, I understood what my mother meant when she said. Some things you don't inherit. You protect, Next, the letter I never sent. Sometimes I wonder what I would say to him, if I ever chose to write it all down. Not to gloat. Not to reopen the wound. But to close it properly. I came close once. On a rainy afternoon in my downtown loft, months after the dust had finally settled. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and pulled out a sheet of heavy cream paper, the kind that begs for truths too big for email. And I wrote. Damon. You once asked if it was worth it. If burning your life down was the price I was willing to pay just to be free of you. Let me answer. Yes. Yes, it was worth it. Because it wasn't about fire. It wasn't about watching you fall. It was about finally stepping out from under the shadow of a man who built his world by erasing the women who made it possible. It was about saying no, not just to you, but to the version of me who kept saying yes to things that didn't feel right. Yes, I knew you were charming. Yes, I knew you could spin gold out of air. But I also knew, deep down, you never looked at me and saw a partner. You saw a vault. You saw access. And when you thought I'd never check the lock, you forged the key. What you didn't count on was that I wasn't your first. And what you really didn't count on, was that your first came back. Stronger. Smarter. Angrier. You tried to break us in silence. We broke you in public. That wasn't revenge. That was restoration. You taught me so much, how predators wrap control in affection, how easy it is to mistake confidence for integrity, and how the biggest lies are often told with the softest voice. But I also learned what I look like when I'm not surviving. When I'm living. You don't know that version of me. You never will. She laughs more. Sleeps better. And never signs anything without reading the fine print twice. There's a cottage in the hills now. Mine. A garden. Wind chimes on the porch. No name on the mailbox but mine. No promises whispered like threats. Just air. Clean and wide and mine. And it's quiet there. The kind of quiet where noise finally dies. You won't find it. You won't touch it. Because you never really saw it. Just like you never really saw me. So no, I won't return your calls. No, I won't pity you. And no, I won't send this letter. Because you don't need my words anymore. You need a mirror. Elara. I folded the letter. Placed it in an envelope. Didn't seal it. Didn't send it. Just tucked it into the back of my sketchbook, between two unfinished designs. Because some closure doesn't need delivery. It just needs acknowledgement. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, the last of the leaves blew free from the trees. I closed my eyes. And let go. The story wasn't about him anymore. It never was. It was about the woman who learned to choose herself. And never forgot how to rebuild. Not from ashes. But from stone. Solid. Unshakable. The kind of foundation no one could ever steal again.